Neuroplasticity, I think, is a really important new discovery. It basically means that our brains are always changing and can adapt to even a serious head injury. So when we are living our lives, it's important to recognize that we're always learning, and as we learn, our brains develop. So if we're constantly looking for things that we're doing wrong, or things that we didn't do right or could have done better, we're growing that part of the brain that's the critical part of the brain. So it's important for us to look for the things that we are doing right. Because remember, we're probably genetically programmed to look for the things that we're not doing right. We have to work hard at looking at the things that we do well and making sure that we spend time to integrate those into ourself. One of the things that we are just beginning to understand is this critical sense of self is actually probably genetically imprinted in us or on us, so that we stay alive. It's a survival instinct. And for years we thought that this was a neurotic experience and that we had to, root this out. But really it's probably a way of keeping us hyper-vigilant so that, if there was a lion hiding behind this pillar, I would be aware of it and be prepared to either run or fight it. So that's always working in us, and we need to be aware of that. We're going to move towards the negative to the critical because we're likely genetically programmed that way. So we have to fight really hard to bring in the positive experience.
And that's exactly what we found. Each of the participants at our roundtable discussions shared a bit about what works for them and how they maintain their joy and inner peace amidst life's challenges.
You have to make time for the things that you care about. Mm-hmm. And I actively try and do that in my life. I don't think anybody's ever 100% satisfied with the amount of time that they allocate towards their passions or their hobbies. Mm-hmm. But real life always gets in the way. Right? And you have to hold down a job, you have to do those chores, you have to cook food and all that kind of stuff.
It was just interesting when you said you read a book on emotional intelligence, because I feel like a lot of people really underestimate how important it is to be so well versed in emotional intelligence. I feel like IQ is something that everyone thinks about so often, and having emotional intelligence is so often overlooked. So I applaud you for taking the time to read a book on emotional intelligence. And it honestly, when you start learning those kinds of things, it really, really improves your relationships, how you react to certain situations, and I thought that was really cool.
Thank you.
I won't just say I like people, but I like seeing the possibilities and the potential and the goodness in people.
Right. What I've really learned, growing up, we moved every 2 to 3 years because my dad was in the military. So I learned very quickly that your current reality is not forever. Your environment is not forever. Nothing is forever. So you need to adapt and find the good in everything that you have right now. And I feel like that's really allowed me to really see what's good in everything, And
so a lot of nodding happening around the power of perception.
Yeah.
For me, I think it was more my relationship with myself and the environment that was around me that really affected my happiness. And once I began to use my time to cultivate those relationships with myself, with getting rid of negative influences around me, that's when I really started to figure out what made me happy and how I can spend my time doing things that cultivated those relationships.
Sure, the environment, whether you want to or not, does have a role to play in your perception and the way you feel your emotions. And I think for me, I learned very early on to choose the people I surround myself with. And that's something my mom tells me to this day, which is so embarrassing when she tells her friends, that at a very young age, I chose my friends very wisely. And into my adulthood, I'm conscious of that. And I strive to be among people that inspire me and that have a quality that I like and that resonates well with me and that has served me well. And so that's definitely something that I'll continue to do. And so, in a nutshell, that is choosing your environment because you can. And it's recognizing and believing that you can. And then once that's done, once that starts in your mind, then you can take the actions physically to manifest itself.
And so what I was going to say before, to take one step back, it's mainly related to this fear of not fulfilling my purpose.
Yeah.
So I used to struggle with the fear of not fulfilling my purpose, and what really helped me, what the rewiring I have done, is deconstructing my beliefs and not being too strict on myself. I'm trying to be unconditional about myself and others. Yeah.
One of the most powerful realizations I had personally was that just because you have a thought crossing through your brain doesn't make it real.
Yeah.
And having that awareness to say, just because I'm thinking that doesn't mean that that's who I am, or doesn't mean that that's how I'm going to live my life, is a profound moment of self-realization.
It's the most productive, I feel. When you have some negative emotions, you just say, okay, I have them, and you watch them, and you do not try to run away from them or to reject them. And it's the most productive because in this case, they do not bother you so much. Because as soon as you try to do something about them, they just getting stronger and just fight.
Well, whenever you say, don't think about that, what do you think about? I would even extend that and say, feeling grateful for the thought, and whatever it is that it teaches you can be very powerful as well.
One of the things that I do virtually every morning is journal. And I just had my own history of depression and anxiety, and that's been the tool, the mechanism that's really helped me to be clear about what I'm thinking, what I'm feeling, and processing. What's the good here? Okay, what am I learning here? Because that's one of the things that motivates me. And without fail, there's something to be learned, even if I'm just learning about myself. So even if the situation doesn't change, chances are just reflecting on it is going to help me realize how I can address it, endure it, tolerate it, or whatever. And there's a lot to be grateful for about that. So there's been a reconditioning and reprogramming of my brain from that proactive activity every day.
I think that I've been very lucky that I've always had a positive attitude. I was just wired that way. And I'm able to somehow deconstruct what I do and how I think to help others, and then make sure that I continue to do it so that I don't just take it for granted as something that I do naturally. If I'm ever in a funk, I'll be like, okay, now do what you should be doing right now. So I also journal every day, and I'll write a list of what I'm grateful for and what intentions for that day, how I want to appear in the world, whether it's productive or kind or happy or helpful or whatever. So I do that every day. I try to always be reading something to keep me in that mindset as well. And meditating, I would love to tell you that I do that every day. I try.
I'm going to throw this out there. A lot of it has to do with your internal perspective and your internal choices. What about externally? So in terms of, we live in a society that we live in. We have the time that we do. How have those been in terms of barriers or challenges? Or is it, again, it's the choice?
I think similar to the perspectives, a big part of it is recognizing the truths versus the lies, right? Because I think that's a big part of whatever circumstance or situation that we might be living in, right? So dentists have the highest suicide rate. Well, I don't want to have a suicide rate, period, right? That's to me and to my personal system. That's a complete lie that I'm just going to choose not to believe, and I'm not going to live that way. Why do I need to go into work every day and be completely miserable, have my energy completely sucked out of me, and go home and not want to deal with anything, right? So it's also like recognizing what that lie might be, saying, you know what, unfortunately this career, you're going to be miserable. That's a lie to me. So I won't accept that lie. I'm going to choose a completely different truth for myself.
I think it's important for us to recognize as humans, we have the capacity to go in either direction. The direction of being scared and fearful and critical of ourselves, or embracing our abilities and strengths and building on that. And I hope when people watch this, they'll see that there is a choice, and that it is not an easy choice. It takes a lot of work and time to spend looking for the positives every day in your life, every moment in your life, but it really does change your life. It makes you a much more grounded, happy, successful individual.
Research indicates that our thoughts and behaviors impact 40% of our happiness. Neuroscience and countless other research affirm this, which for me is so powerful. It gives me hope. It is hard work and requires consistent practice, but change is possible. Change is possible within us, and that can make a spillover effect on our families, our workplaces, our communities, our nation, and even the world. I'd like to share one of the most impactful messages and lessons from Rising Strong by Brené Brown that really resonates with me on the power of the middle. She says, "The middle is messy, and that is where the magic happens." When sharing about this project, or even as a speaker, when I go into organizations, I have a great beginning and a powerful ending. And the middle is the portion where we usually just say, oh, and that was really hard, and it was miserable, and you don't want to hear about it. And really it's because we don't want to go back into it. We don't want to remember and sit with those difficult emotions, the discomfort, the fears, the vulnerability, the inner critic that comes up. And so we dismiss it and focus on the happy ending. And it is where the magic happens. It's where we spend the most time in therapy. We don't jump from trigger to reaction like this. Neither do we move from pain to healing like this. So I'd like to end with my middle. This project was the toughest one that I've worked on. I believe strongly in its impact and the importance, but I found my perfectionistic tendencies was such a big barrier. I was hitting this wall. Nothing that I was doing was good enough for the vision that I had for the project. And logistically, editing videos is so tough. I have a huge respect for people behind the scenes that work to make these things flawless. And so I found myself unable to motivate myself to keep going. And I internalized that as something wrong with me. My lack of motivation must have meant that I really didn't care about the project. And what kind of person does that make me? And yet I couldn't let it go. I couldn't bring myself to completely cut myself loose. And so I lived with this at the back of my mind for 2 years, with the guilt constantly there, as well as that little flicker, that flame of hope. Project Gratitude is like the prologue. The conversations you have, the stories you share, the actions you take going forward will all inform your life path. The question remains, what will you choose?